But I mean, you're quite right, I mean, power consumption on any mesh telephone is an issue, and one of the things that we're looking to do but haven't had a chance yet is to, particularly while you're in GSM coverage, I mean, you may actually decide not to have the mesh on at all, in which case there is no net loss of autonomy, and then you just make your calls on the mobile regular phone network. But
I think the problem with this strategy is the people close to your GSM tower will switch off the mesh, and the people far away from the mesh tower who need the relays don't have the relays, and so you need some kind of reactive technology that someone who needs the mesh can send out a broadcast to someone else and saying, hey guy, please activate your mesh forwarding, so we don't have to run the mesh protocol all the time.
Indeed, and one of the things that we're looking at is, I mean, particularly because the traffic required to maintain a mesh is quite small. So there's no reason why, with a little bit of synchronization, you couldn't have the mesh doing its housekeeping when there's no calls happening in, say, a duty cycle of 5% or so. So, a 50 millisecond slice every second. With GPS satellites, it's very easy to have the clocks on the phones well synchronized, and of course they can just watch the radio to fall into step with all the others time-wise. In that case, using 1/20th of the power that Wi-Fi would normally use, you're probably not going to notice any great difference in total autonomy. But once you move out of GSM coverage, as we found, these phones outside of GSM coverage go from full to flat in 2 hours. In fact, possibly a little bit less than that. Whereas turn off the GSM radio and turn on the Wi-Fi radio and have a mesh instead, and you get probably 4 or 6 hours with standard battery. With the big fat battery we've been using, somewhere between 12 and 24 hours. So once you move out of GSM coverage, it's actually better to use the mesh than it is to keep the GSM radio running the whole time. You need to run it periodically to see if you come back into service. But in reality, do you need to know the second you come back into GSM service, or say polling on average every 15 minutes or so that it's on average it's half that, so 7 or 8 minutes before you find out you're back in coverage. This is probably going to be an okay trade-off. But you're right, there are issues to optimize.
Sure. To understand this correctly, what is the power requirement of the mesh network in comparison to the normal GSM coverage, generally speaking?
It would depend on whether you're very close to a GSM tower or whether you're a very long way away from a GSM tower. So particularly in Australia, there are many places, even urban-wise, where you'll actually be a number of kilometres away. But because I think the GSM radio on most phones can transmit at 4 watts. Whereas, of course, the Wi-Fi is 100 milliwatts, but of course 900 megahertz, you can have a little bit more efficient radio if you're on that band. But if you're on UMTS 2100, for example, then if you're actively using the data on that, that will actually deplete your battery faster than using the Wi-Fi for data. So power is something that we need to optimise, and we've very much, if we only really started this project in February, March timescale, we haven't had the time to sit down and optimise the power characteristics, but I think there's ample scope to do that. So back to our lovely packaging, the last 2 things we have here, we have the Serval backphone compatible, nice, like Intel Inside kind of logo on the phone, so people know they're getting a phone that's going to work with the mesh. And then we also have the nice Village Telco compatible. Who's calling one of the phones? Is that it? Yeah, that's right. Is that one of the mesh potatoes ringing?
Yes. Is that a backhaul? It's not me.
It's FCC speaking. I hear music.
Oh, sorry, that's it's the registration process. Blondie. The song is Call Me.
Call me. I'm alone.
That's right. So in terms of where we've got to date, so the only real funding we've had to actually do the work on these, the lovely Awesome Foundation in Boston, a ray of sunshine in terms of granting compared to the traditional sources in Australia where you spend 3 months of your time writing 93 pages and then they only fund 1/5 of the projects that they deem worth funding. So 3 minutes on the web, writing 400 words into a web form, and then 2 weeks later a call from Boston saying, here's $1,000. So with that, we actually bought the first handsets that we were using. And then once we actually got it all working, it's actually quite funny. Public relations and marketing gets much more funding than what you do to do the research. So once I said to the university that this is what we were looking to do, they found marketing budget on the basis that we were going to be filming what we were doing so that they could promote it to incoming potential students to raise the profile of the university. They said, oh look, here's $3,000 Australian to help you do the transport and everything up there. And where we went up here in Arkaroola, which is lovely in the outback, the other support for what we've been doing has actually come from it's a privately owned wilderness sanctuary up there. And they're very keen to raise their profile in the national and international eye, partly because there's a silly mining company that wants to put a uranium mine under a national geological monument in a wilderness sanctuary. So they were actually very keen, particularly when they heard that we were having a media crew come up with us. They said, look, if you need to charter a helicopter to fly around to go to different places, we'll pick up the tab for the helicopter. So they paid for nearly 3 hours of helicopter time. And I can assure you it was arduous, flying in a helicopter over this fantastic rugged scenery. But yeah, ultimately the field trial was 2% actual test, because of course we could test it, and indeed we did test it down where we were, and it really was just a public relations exercise to get some attraction. And I'll just show you the news piece that ran. My apologies again if it's a little bit dark on the.
It's up against the euro, and that's finance.
Anywhere, at any time. That's the promise of a new mobile phone system that works in places where there's no reception. Australian researchers have developed the technology and say it could help save lives in a disaster.
They've gone all out just to prove a point. Researchers from Flinders University have come to Scylla's outlook in the Arkaroola wilderness in South Australia's far north. It's a breathtaking spot for many travellers who want to get away from the world and drop out of contact.
Here at Arkaroola, the nearest mobile phone coverage is probably 100 or 130 kilometres away. There are places that we're visiting today where we're in chasms and gorges where even satellite phones actually have a lot of trouble.
It's no problem for a system that doesn't need towers or satellites. Each phone is fitted with software that allows them to talk to each other.
Hello Danny, can you hear me?
It's an adaptation of wireless internet technology, but instead of transmitting data over radio waves,
did a lot of mashed potato design.
Out here, conventional mobile phones are useless, but with this new system, it's easy to make a call.
Hello Paul, how did the test go? Hi Jason, yeah, the test has been 100% successful.
So far, the system's range is limited to a few hundred metres, but can be boosted with small transmitters.
You could compare that to deploying a GSM base station.
Or emergency.
3 years they say it takes to get a new base station in San Francisco.
Or a similar aircraft overfly in the immediate hours after a disaster and drop perhaps 100 or even 1,000 of these units, because again, they're very cheap and really provide a very effective telecommunications network.
For now, they're happy they've been able to set up a connection where there was none. Jason on ABC News, Arkaroola.
So the interesting thing, of course, is that it's the media coverage actually worked very effectively in terms of getting the attention of government and some businesses and all sorts of things. So we are talking with there's a Chinese American handset design company, I think, that are making a phone for doing augmented reality kind of work, and they're very keen to have a mesh network and to add this capability to it. So I'm quite hopeful that we'll get some attention from there, and ultimately I'm trying to get funding so that I can actually go back to working only one job at a time, which we much better family-wise, and my wife might not change the keys on the house too soon on me in that situation. But getting some attention from some interesting places as well. The Defence Signals Directorate in Australia quietly sent me an email after the coverage as well and said, "Oh, we'd like to know more about the security parameters of what you're doing and whether it has encryption, and it's kind of the subtext of if someone bad was using it, what are their options for for surveillance and those sorts of things." Sorry?
Are you wondering whether they can tap this?
I think so. And ultimately the answer is going to be exceptionally hard to tap it, for use in a local area. But everything has good and bad sides. We use cars to drive around the place, but bad people use cars to do hold-ups. it's the same fundamental issue. I mean, we use air to breathe and do nice things in the world, and other people breathe air and do bad things in the world. So, in that sense, it doesn't worry me greatly that this is, like any enabling technology, it will have positive and negative applications.
Mashed potatoes banned from Saudi Arabia.
Well, I mean, my jaw has dropped. I mean, it's really very interesting. I suppose my concern is, do you appreciate how potentially disruptive this is? Because, well, let me just finish.
Sure.
While your heart, understandably, is driven by the disaster situation, and I can understand that, I think this is a really significant combination of innovation. And the important thing is, at the moment, it's legal.
Yes.
There's nothing about this which is contravening anything. My concern is that it gets seen as a potential solution for disaster or unique spook or whatever it is situations, and suddenly there's a swoop on it from the regulatory or public policy or the political areas which silos it or puts a regulatory prohibition around it for use in any other way. And so all I would really plead with you is you have to, and if I can help, or anybody else can help, you have to have a strategy for making sure that it bursts big into the public arena where it can't be hijacked, as well as doing these other things that are important. Does that make any sense?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I was just going to point out that there's a move to make it illegal in many different ways and using many different vectors to do this kind of hacking on these devices. This is why when the US, Library of Congress or something like that, decided that it was legal to open your phone, to hack your phone, it was announced as big news, but was not really announced in that news. It's also legal for AT&T to then brick your iPhone. And, in my mind, that's one of the next battles is going to be over, can we legally open these phones up to do all this crazy, awesome machinery? Or is that going to be made illegal?
Well, and this is actually why I'm keen to do the overlay mesh. I want to have a contingency for assuming no root access to a phone. So just assuming that you can do UDP network traffic, and assuming that you can put the phone into ad hoc mode, using only those two assumptions, that you can achieve all of this capability. And there's in fact no reason why that's not the case. But I think you're right, this is going to be tremendously disruptive. I do remember a couple of occasions where I sort of thought about that and thought, in 10 years' time, either this is going to disappear, but I think that's a small probability, or in 10 years' time, we're going to look back and think, this was the point at which, the revolution began.
Your wife may not be the only person that's not sure.
No, that's right. We'll have to emigrate somewhere nice like New Zealand or something.
I mean,
asylum.
you do need to take it, honestly, I plead with you, for the sake